Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Ronald Kray, company director, convicted of murder, 30 years. Reginald Kray, company director, convicted of murder, 30 years. These two men, twins born in the East End of London 35 years ago, defied society for most of their lives. Their recommended sentences are the longest ever passed at the Old Bailey for murder. Society, said the judge, deserved a rest from their activities. Activities that brought London as close to the bad old days of Chicago as it's ever likely to get. From the very start, on their own private manor, a word they borrowed from the police to describe the streets, pubs and clubs of the East End, on their own private manor they fought for a name, for a reputation. They got it by learning quickly just how to turn insecurity, and above all fear, to their own advantage. Theirs is no story of a fight against poverty or a broken home. At Valence Road in Bethnal Green, like a lot of East Enders in the post-war years, they lived a comfortable and close-knit family life. Number 178, now coming down as part of a slum clearance plan, Vi and Charlie Kray, a dealer in second-hand clothes, brought up 4 children, Charles Jr., the twins, and a daughter, Violet. Next door lived Auntie May and a grandfather, once the famous Cannonball Southpaw, a professional boxer. And as youngsters, for the twins too, boxing was the consuming interest. They papered their bedroom walls with pictures of the champions. At school, it was the only thing they did really well. They both left at 14 with a reputation already as tough young tearaways. Soon afterwards, they joined the famous Repton Club, the so-called Nursery of Champions. A probation officer had asked the club to take them in. Repton agreed on the understanding that they'd behave themselves. And for a time it did seem that the discipline required by the club was having an effect. They were never any trouble. They joined in the strict and strenuous training sessions. They were fit and fast learning how to handle themselves. Boxing, of course, has always been a draw for East End boys. For one thing, if you're good, there's money in it. And the Kray twins were above average. In 1950, at the age of 17, they turned professional. On their first appearance, 6-round preliminaries at Mile End Bath, they both won. In all, Ronald had 6 fights and won 4. Reggie had 7 and won the lot. People who know them well say that if they'd gone on with their boxing careers, they might have settled down. Up to then, they'd had only minor brushes with the law. But now came the first real test, the first genuine confrontation with authority, national service. They'd been told to report to the Royal Fusiliers, based a stone's throw away from home at the Tower of London. On the first day, they hit the sergeant in charge and ran. 6 months later, they were caught and eventually sent to Shepton Mallet, then an army prison in Somerset. 9 months' detention had little effect. The army could do nothing with them. A day after their sentence was over, they were discharged from further service. As far as they were concerned, they'd beaten the system. For the first time, too, they'd been away from the moderating influence of their elder brother, Charles. Now, at the age of 22, they were back in the East End and convinced that they could defy authority, and, if not exactly get away with it, at least make it and the people round them come to terms. The first step was to open a billiard hall in a back street off the Mile End Road. Just a small affair, 4 tables in an old hut. But it had its purpose. It brought in some tough characters, and word soon got through to Jack Spot, in the early 50s, the so-called king of the underworld, that 2 young tearaways were around who could prove useful. Spot took them on and sent them to the races. Part of Spot's money came from bookies. He controlled some of the pitchers. It was the Krays' job to collect the dues and deliver them for a cut. It wasn't exactly a lucrative pastime, but they were learning about pension lists, jarring, zumpa cars, slaughter, the corner game, and dozens of other obscure underworld practices. At the same time, they were trying things out for themselves. In the East End, local cafe owners and shopkeepers were paying out money, small sums, a few pounds a week, to save any trouble. Roland Millington was a detective superintendent in the district. He knew only too well what was going on. He tried many times to get people to stand up in court to give evidence against the Krays. No one would do it. They were simply too scared. He took his problem to Scotland Yard, but apparently there was little they could do either. But on November the 6th, 1956, Ronald Kray did land in court on his first serious charge, causing grievous bodily harm. He was sentenced to 3 years, with 6 months concurrently for carrying a loaded revolver. The recorder, Sir Gerald Dodson, said Kray and 2 others involved in the attack had plunged parts of the East End into an abyss of brutality. To Kray's disgust, he was sent to a security wing at Longgrove Mental Hospital, Epsom. To prove his sanity, as he later put it, he escaped. On Whit Monday, 1957, Reggie Kray came into the visitor's room wearing identical clothes. Ronnie went out for the tea and never came back. By the time the authorities had sorted out which twin was which, Ronald was in comfortable hiding in London. 5 months later, he gave himself up. The object had been achieved. He was regarded as sane enough to be sent to Winchester Prison to complete his sentence. In the East End, incidents like Longgrove all added to the Kray reputation. The people there read about it, talked about it. The name Kray was taking on a very special meaning. It was time to try something bigger, beyond the small cafes and restaurants, to a particular kind of gambling club. They were illegal, but at that time they were doing good business. In the East End, they're known as spielers, a kind of gambling den. George Meisel, a bullion merchant, was in a partnership which bought up this particular spieler 11 years ago. It's known officially as the Green Dragon Luncheon and Social Club, but its sole attraction is gambling. Day and night, 7 days a week, East Enders come here to play rummy. Individual stakes range from £1 to £5 a game. The Krays let George Meisel know they wanted to protect him. He refused, and the club was smashed up. Finally, his co-directors persuaded him that the only way to keep in business was to pay up.
At that time I had a manager who was connected to the firm, or people known as the firm, and he paid it.
And how much did you pay?
£40 a week.
For how long?
Approximately 10 years.
So that means you paid out something like £20,000?
In that region, yes.
So here was a form of regular income. The money was coming in. And so long as people went on paying, so long as they remained afraid, the money would keep coming in. So far, they were now in their middle 20s, the Krays' reputation was based entirely on brutality and violence. It wasn't enough. They wanted admiration from society at large. And to get it, they began by opening their own club, the Double R in Bow Road. It provided a comfortable headquarters. On the floor above, they built a gymnasium. They invited the British heavyweight champion Henry Cooper along to the opening ceremony. Next, they approached Robert Hare, the then mayor of Bethnal Green, to find out how they could help his charities. On one occasion, they took the initiative themselves, to everyone's embarrassment.
I wanted to look at some stuff for the old people. So we carried it in bundles all right through the gangway of these old people, you know.
Checker Barry grew up in the East End with the Krays. He watched them develop, followed their careers closely.
And we went to leave. So the mayor says, "Don't go yet." He said, "I want to give you some cheers from the old people." Well, you know, I'm a bit shy of anything like that, and so is Ronnie. So he said, "You take the bows," he says, "and I'll see you later." I went to run out. So, "Well, don't go without me." And I went to run off the stage and all. So he said, "No, stay." And the mayor held us, and he says, "Right, 3 cheers, hip hip, hooray." And I was cheering away, you know. If the ground could have opened, I'd have slipped through it, you know, so embarrassed. And we ran down the aisle, and as we was running, walking through the gangway, people was patting us on the back and everything, and cheering us like it was the president coming over to the United States of America. And the thing is, I didn't know till afterwards, well, a few years afterwards, this stuff could have been hot. Well, I suppose it was hot. And the thought of it, if the police had raided that place then, there would have been the mayor, me, Ronnie, and about 200 old pensioners all in court, you know, all receiving charges.
At the local town hall, they sat on subcommittees set up by the mayors to organise charity functions. One of the most popular was a boxing tournament. Often they were organised by the Repton Club. And while the youngsters trained themselves up to take part, the twins would buy hundreds of pounds worth of tickets, mostly ringside. These they resold or gave away to prominent personalities. In all, they claimed they'd raised more than £10,000, money that did go to charity, even if the motive was somewhat suspect. The secretary of Repton Boxing Club, Mr. Harry Minter, explains how he felt they were using the club.
I think it was what I would term a front. Because if ever they were in trouble, they were able to say, quite truthfully, what they did for charity through the Repton Club. Stood them in good stead, character-wise.
To keep up their image, in the summer of '62, the Krays opened the Kentucky Club. It was still in the East End, but with £2,000 spent on the decorations, just the place to bring the sort of people they now wanted to impress. The club's name featured in Joan Littlewood's Cockney comedy Sparrows Can't Sing, shot almost entirely in East End locations. Unwittingly, the film was a gift. For the first time, it gave the twins an opportunity to play host to people in the real show business world. In March 1963, they held a party in the Kentucky Club to celebrate the film's world premiere. The photographers were there, as they were whenever the Krays wanted them, with boxers Rocky Marciano, Sonny Liston, Freddie Mills, with entertainers Sophie Tucker, Shirley Bassey, Billy Daniels, with peers and politicians, Lord Effingham, Tom Dryburgh. This business of trying to get into photographs with celebrities, and sometimes they didn't know it was happening, often went to extreme lengths.
I remember on one occasion at the Repton Club, as a charitable evening, the twins had...
Harry Mitchell, a journalist in the East End for 40 years.
And the local DI, going through the list of people who were around to have their photographs taken, found that the Kray twins had got themselves positioned almost behind Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon, who were the guests of honour for the evening. Well, needless to say, he got cracking very, very quickly, and they were not behind. The final part of the whole business was it made them respectable. It gave them some respectability, something to base their lives on, you see. And of course, people thought from that, you see, they weren't bad fellows. They weren't bad fellows, where in actual fact, that their money was easy to come and they could afford to spend it, because it wasn't theirs.
By 1964, their home in Valence Road, Fort Valence, as it was called because of the collection of swords they kept there, was an East End landmark. Outside stood one of the few obvious signs of affluence, a maroon Ford Galaxy, now owned by a South London car dealer. The Krays bought it originally on hire purchase, but for the neighbours at least it provided a sure sign that the owners were doing well, even though they were still based at their parents' home.
It was immaculate inside. A tiny little Victorian terrace workman's cottage. Every single door had a lace curtain over it, tied back with pink ribbons. The place was full of art.
Nemone Lethbridge, as a young barrister, defended the Krays on a number of minor charges.
Gilt glasses, horse brasses, everything that gave it this shining, sparkling, gypsy-like appearance.
What happened when you got there?
Well, I was taken to an upstairs sitting room, and again, a beautifully polished room. There were people in every single room. There appeared to be conferences going on here, there, and everywhere.
What do you think was their reputation in the East End? Was it based purely upon fear?
I don't think so. Obviously, but one speaks now with hindsight after all that's happened in this case. Fear played a large part in it. And I think this is because they always did what they threatened. There was no messing about. If they threatened to do a thing, it was done. And this is why people really did fear them. But at the same time, people in the East End would say to you, oh, I was with Ronnie and Reggie last night. Just as actors, I was in the White Elephant with Larry and Albie. It was the summit of glory to be seen in the company of the twins and to be bought a drink by them. And undoubtedly they were generous, and they did give to charity and so on and so forth. Of course, one mustn't inquire too closely into the origin of the money that went to charity. But they never repudiated their Cockney origins, and they never left the East End.
6 for the band, and 2. The
But soon their operations, at any rate, did begin to spread west. In the early 60s, gaming in Britain became a legal pastime. The prospects of huge profits was not something the Krays were slow to appreciate. They bought themselves into Esmeralda's Barn, then a fashionable club in Knightsbridge. As a business venture, it failed. The Krays used the club as a one-way bank, somewhere to get money out of without putting it back. But at Esmeralda's, for the first time, they did come in touch with the so-called high life. They thought they'd made it at last.
Because we had a man working there, you know, high birth, you know. I mean, we come from the East End of London. This man had a title, I suppose, I don't know. And he used to say to me, now look at them lot. They all owe me money. Everyone round that table owes him money. And they're all, you know, people like that. And he'd say, I'll just show you, excuse me. And this man used to come over of high birth. And he'd say, will you give me 2 teas, please? And he'd say, just run away and come and say, you know, he's earning £15 a week for us, and they're looking down on us. He said, those days are over. When we was in the East End of London and all these snobs looked down on us. He said, now, he said, we're equal to them.
March 1965, the Krays are in the dock at the Old Bailey, charged with demanding money with menaces from a baronet. After a retrial, the jury disagreed. The Krays were acquitted. Back home at Valence Road, the family was triumphant. The acquittal was taken as yet another sign of how far the Krays were now above the law. People were calling them the Untouchables. The legends were growing. But in Gerrard Street, at a celebration party the very next night, a man was about who 4 years later was to give those legends the lie. Detective Inspector Leonard Reed, as he was then, Nipper Reed, had been involved in the protection inquiries. He'd taken a colleague down to the party to identify the members of the firm gathered together. When they saw him, they jeered. They were now so confident that all subtleties were being abandoned. Their name was inspiring so much fear that club owners rarely refused when asked to contribute to what was euphemistically called the pension scheme. Often members of the firm, or the gang they'd now built around them, collected the money themselves. Sometimes they were allowed to keep it, as a form of payment for loyalty. The Regency, Stoke Newington, lost thousands to the Krays. It began with nipping, that's to say running up vast bills for food and drink, which they knew the owners would never dare ask them to pay. Tony and John Barry, joint owners of the Regency, described the night members of the firm came to put them on the pension.
Broke the doors in to get in. They're downstairs. Alan went down to see what it was all about, and they got hold of him right away and gave him a cloak with a gun, pushed the gun up his nose, and they said, get hold of Johnny Barry, we want to speak to him. You're going on a pension scheme. I said, well, what's it all about? I said, pension scheme. He said, you're going to pay £50 a week. So I said, right, no, I thought there's going to be some trouble here, you know what I mean? I said, all right, lovely, I said, I'll pay it. I said, this is how it's got to be. I said, like, let's have a drink, because I was frightened at what I was going to do. And as I'm talking, one of the firms got the gun on Alan, and he said, if you don't pay, he said, we're going to shoot one of your men every week. He said, he can go now, he said, if you want to be funny. So I said, legal. I said, I said, let's have a drink. I said, I'll pay it. I said, and that's the end of it.
Tony, give me some examples of the kind of violence that the Krays were involved in here.
Well, one night we was out, I came back from Stratford, it was my night off, and I'd been out with Mr. Clark, who's our doorman, and as we came into the foyer, they was arguing with a man who we know, and Reggie asked him 1 or 2 questions, and with that he's pulled out a flick knife and struck the man right across the face.
That man was Buller Ward.
Going to have about 30 stitches, 36 stitches, something like 32 stitches, I'm not quite sure. And that was it.
Why did one of the twins have to use a knife?
Well, I think it was because, I don't know if they thought that I was a bit too much for one of them, because when he threw me these punches, I said to him, if that's the hardest you can hit, you'll have to do a lot better than that. And consequently, this is what happened.
Didn't it ever cross your mind, Tony, that you could stop this by calling the police?
By the time you'd have called the police and they'd have got here, the Krays would have gone. And apart from that, there would have been repercussions afterwards. They could always come back here, whereas you could never find, the police could never find them. They seem to be above the law.
The autumn of 1966, Joe Louis is in Britain for a series of guest appearances at clubs and boxing matches in northern cities. It was a tour arranged and controlled very firmly by the twins. They were using the ex-champion as a cover. Louis never knew it, but he was no more than an excuse to get the twins into the northern clubs to extend their protection racket. Sunday, October the 23rd, Louis, the twins and 8 others travelled first class to Manchester. Joe Louis is unaware that 2 admirers in the party are carrying guns. The attraction at this time was that Manchester had developed a rash of small-time casinos and strip clubs, numbering 70 at least, and all ripe for protection. But what the Krays didn't know was that the local police had been tipped off and were shadowing them from the moment they arrived. The Krays booked themselves and Louis into the 4-star Midland Hotel. And in the tea lounge next day, club owners were summoned to a so-called business conference.
Right.
A conference witnessed not only by plainclothes police at adjoining tables, but also by David Burton. He'd been employed to drive Louis and the twins about, and saw the strange affair that followed.
I knew Joe. There were people who were sat in the lounge, you know, having cocktails and things. They wondered what was going on, because it wasn't very nice to see 15 people with the feet up on the table, you know, sprawling about.
What about this club owner who came in and told them to clear out and told them he wasn't going to pay any money?
They told him to sit down. They didn't ask him to sit down, they said sit down. It's a command. This he did. And they said, you know, we're thinking of doing some business in Manchester and we've left ourselves rather short of money. Would you just lend us £500 to tide us over to pay the bills, etc.? Well, this fellow looked at his assistant and sort of smiled, half laughed. And they said, well, we'll give it you back, and we'll give it you back in fruit machines and cigarette machines. And this chap turned around to them, he said, I know what you're getting at, you can, you know, in other words, go and get stuff.
It had taken club owners and police just 24 hours to outmaneuver the twins and send them back to London, travelling second class this time. They got similar treatment at Newcastle, Blackpool and Southport. So attempts at establishing a provincial network failed. Not that it particularly worried them. Life now was treating them well. They could afford expensive holidays abroad, and they did travel quite widely. Tangiers was a particular favourite. Even at home, life on the firm, as they put it, seemed little more than fun and games.
One time it was me and Ronnie and another fellow was coming down this lane, and Reggie, a big Pat, and a couple of more just went galloping through the woods. But we took them out as we came running down the lane. Very small ponies. And this is true, you might not believe it, it's true. We come down to the end and then Big Pat and Reggie come tearing out on us on the horses. The horses wasn't running fast, but they was moving back and forwards. And Ronnie said, get away, you know, because he's frightened the horse. And Reggie said, go on, he's pushing his horse. So anyway, they had a few words off the horse. So he said, if you touch my horse, he said, I'm going to kick your horse. So Reggie got off his horse. True as I'm sitting here. I walked up and smashed and hit the horse on the chin, and the horse went down all fours, you know, fell. And as it fell, Ronnie walked off the horse. As it fell down, the horse ducked his head. Ronnie walked off of it and got hold of Reggie, started pulling him off and making his horse gallop, you know. Let's have some lovely fun out there.
But nothing could really disguise the true activities of the firm, the way the money was got to pay for all the fun. For Alan Purvis, life on the firm was far from a joke. He knew the sinister side of it all, knew how they set about persuading people to join them.
After I was released from Canterbury, I found my financial means very low at the time, and I was asked to meet various people that were connected with the twins. But at that time, I didn't know they were actual members of the twin gang. The proposition was approached to me in certain business deals. I agreed to this, and he told me to wait at home, and later on in time they'd get in touch with me. Well, mind you, I was on wages then. Wasn't a lot, about £20–25 per week.
Wages from whom?
I was on wages from the twins.
They paid you every week?
Oh, yes, most definitely, yes.
For doing what?
Well, for nothing at that time, until they could find a business arrangement for me. You know, I know people that actually worked for the Krays that were behind them at some times that never even got paid by the Krays. But they just wanted to be with the Krays to say that they work on the firm. but they never got a penny from them. Well, this is a fact. They're willing to protect them, to shoot people, and yet to just to say that I work for the Krays.
Was that for prestige?
Well, a lot of people wanted to use their name. I mean, in business, you go up to a certain person and you're going to take a lot of money off him, and if he refuses, you can say, well, I work for the Krays. Well, with a thing like that, it stops a man dead in his tracks. He says to himself, well, what am I on here? If I don't pay, I'm sure to have them down on my shoulders.
How much money do you think came into the firm, on average? It's probably an impossible question to answer, but...
Well, it is. I wasn't that tremendously in with them. I was in with them right up to the degree whereas I was told what to do and who to do and where to be and what the case may be. But many, many thousands of pounds. I know many, well, quite considerable sums passed through my hands that went to them.
In fact, justice caught up with you and you went to prison.
Well, this is it, yes. Well, this is a penalty you pay.
How did they look after you when you were in prison?
Well, when I was away at the time, if I wanted anything inside, because they got the firm inside as well as outside, of course, if I was short of anything, or if I wanted anything done, like one time a person that did turn me over outside while I was still inside, if you understand what I mean. And of course I sent a message out, and the person that did turn me over was turned over himself by the members of the firm.
You mean beaten up?
Oh, so yeah, severely.
How was discipline maintained in the firm?
Well, discipline was maintained in various aspects. I myself was disciplined once.
How?
Well, as I say, through business and everything else. I was in my office and they come up to see me. According to Reggie, I wasn't doing things right and that the money wasn't coming in quick enough. I argued with him. For the argument, I took a slap round the face and pushed into the chair.
Yes, you were slapped by Reggie?
Yes.
You're a big man. You can presumably look after yourself. What did you do?
Oh, what could I do? I mean, I know bigger men than me that bow down to them.
If you were slapped by the twins, you didn't slap back?
Oh, nobody did. I've yet to see men who ever come up. There's only one man I know that did retaliate, but of course they got him in the end, and they cut him to pieces.
Was violence an everyday factor in living with the firm?
Oh, naturally. I mean, there was a person that was coming round causing aggravation with me. Well, not one fella, two or three. When I explained the position, Reggie said, well, you've got to do it the hard way. And of course, I was supplied with a firearm and...
With a
firearm, a gun.
What sort of firearm?
Well, it was a 410 shotgun, which I did actually use. Well, the police know of this because the police at that time were understanding because they knew the position I was in. And I explained this to Commander DeRose and to Nicola Reed. Because they said that owing to the fact the predicament I was in, because I've got a family and I've got to protect them, I had to use the gun, but I never used it actually at the person. I just used it to scare him away.
One night when we were sitting in the El Morocco and everybody was looking sort of a bit miserable.
Anne Kerrin hung around the fringes of the firm for about 6 years.
Nobody would speak.
She knew the scene well.
And I think I said to Reggie, you know, what's it all about, boy? And he said, we're looking for such a person. So I said, oh, don't you know where he lives? And he said, no. I said, oh, well, leave it to me, boy, I'll get it together for you. And I made a meet, and I got the character out of bed, and he came down the club.
What did he say when you got him out of bed?
I think he said he knew it was coming to him, or words to that effect. He knew he'd done something out of order, and he had to sort of pay for it. He walked down like a little lamb, and he was greeted sort of, you know, with a right-hander, which I suppose, in due respects, he deserved.
Did you find that any people who were attacked by them still maintained some sort of loyalty towards them?
Some people do.
Give me an example.
Well,
You don't have to name him or her.
well, I know somebody who was, let's say, well attended to, down to absolutely nothing really, but they were sort of well seen to, and they finished up with 182 odd stitches, but even to this day you couldn't go to them and say, you know, give evidence against Lonnie or Reggie, because this character, he wouldn't sort of do this, not for fear of them or anything, because he's sort of loyal and he sort of, I don't know, he digs them. Really and truly, people had no reason to be frightened of them.
Well, 182 stitches in the face would frighten me.
Yes, I suppose in a way it frightened me, but there again it wouldn't really, because you can have, you're either dead or plastic surgery, you know.
Why do you think so many of their friends, including members of the firm, have now given evidence against them?
Well, I think mainly because they were all up to little sort of, no, how can I put it? They were all up to various little bits of skullduggery of their own, which they knew at some time or other had to come to an end. And I think various people, like the Weasel, Nipper Reed, and so various other people said to them, well, you know, if you don't sort of go our way about this, we'll have you for that. This is not only something I think, it's something I know.
So there wasn't really that much loyalty in the end?
No, everybody was out to save their own skins. And this is why Ronnie and Reggie have been put in a position they're in, which in actual fact they don't deserve to put in, because they, you know, if you know them well, they are sort of decent guys, you know. Apart from the fact, alright, same as you and I might have a row, and I might sort of stick a glass in your face. They are exactly the same. Exactly the same.
In the second week of March 1966, the violence reached its climax with murder. First, there was the gunfight at Mr. Smith's club, Catford, in which one man was killed and several injured. It was between two gangs, one of them, the Richardson gang, to establish who should collect protection money from the club. The Krays weren't involved. The Catford shooting was a south of the river affair, on the Richardson territory. But across the water the very next night, Ronnie Kray walked openly into the bar of the Blind Beggar and shot one of the Richardson gang dead in full view of the customers. Friends say George Cornell was killed because he was one of the few men who stood up to the Krays. There was another reason, though. By choosing to commit murder in public, Ronald Kray was trying to prove that he was supreme gang leader in London, that he too could kill and get away with it. It almost worked, as it did when he and Reggie lured Jack McVitie, a small-time criminal, to a flat and stabbed him to death. Half the East End knew who'd done it, but no one would talk to the police, not until the twins and most of the firm were in custody on other charges. By now, the violence was going too far, even for some of the firm themselves, and it could well have gone on. Norman Lucas, chief crime writer for the Sunday Mirror, was one of 7 people, including Superintendent Reed, on a murder list.
They began making telephone calls to my home in Surrey, or rather they didn't, but obviously some of their henchmen did. They were telephone calls that came sometimes during the night. Sometimes there would only be heavy breathing down the phone. I had the experience of a mystery car turning up at my house at 11:30 at night, fortunately when I was spending a weekend in the country.
Why do you think they managed to operate virtually unhindered throughout nearly the whole of the 60s?
Now what had happened was that the Metropolitan Police were undergoing so much criticism, and quite a lot of criticism that came not only from certain newspapers, but from members of Parliament who were ill-informed on various criminal matters, that there was a period in the Met Police when almost anything would be done to avoid criticism, so that the police were working completely by the book, and a directive went out from the yard instructing detectives that they must not frequent clubs and they must not associate with criminals. Well, this put a gross limitation upon their work, and at that time the Krays grew, and they knew that no single detective would take a chance of criticism.
It's a situation that has now, of course, changed or been changed.
It's changed because in the end the situation became so grave that I know the Assistant Commissioner Crime at the Yard, Peter Brodie, and Commander John Giroux thumped their desks and said, no matter what criticism we get, this gang has got to be smashed, and we've got to put an end to gang activities in London, because of course they knew that the mafia was beginning to move in.
And it was to try to meet the mafia that Ronald went to New York. He'd always wanted to go, but he wasn't certain he'd get a visa from the American embassy. So he flew first to Paris, got his papers there, spent the night with a business contact, and on April the 3rd, 1967, left for New York. He checked into the Warwick Hotel on West 54th Street, and his bill there was paid for by one of his American contacts. Federal agents kept a close eye on Kray throughout his visit. There's no real evidence that he ever actually contacted the mafia in America, though he certainly met people he thought were mafia. In fact, most of Ronald's time in New York was spent like any other tourist, doing the sights. But at the giant McGraw-Hill publishing house, he did have a business lunch with the boss, Frank Taylor. They talked about the American edition of a book that's coming out on their life. In London, too, there'd already been attempts to commercialize their story. On the back of a poster on sale in the West End, the caption compares the stories of their exploits with those of Frank and Jesse James. For a time, they were taken up by some sections of society. They did become chic, and they in turn became more and more publicity conscious, or friends and relations, as they called it. Tom Mango.
The twins had also, by this time, acquired a real writer to produce their authentic life story. They even arranged special parties to impress him with the picaresque nature of their lives, and for one of these occasions, they hired a couple of midgets from a theatrical agency. They would have hired a couple of giants as well, but they found in the end that the tallest men around were on the firm anyway. These inconsistencies, these irreconcilable threads, hung even more loosely towards the end, and I'm talking now about March, April and May of last year. I saw the twins for the last time in this Bethnal Green pub a few weeks before their arrest. One thing was certain. They knew it was coming to them, but each reacted in a different way. Reginald, I thought, was tense and uneasy with the knowledge and wanted to get away from London, from the firm, and from his dominant twin. Ronald, on the other hand, was plotting some sort of prosperous future. My last evening with them was understandably uncomfortable for everyone. I was making inquiries into the disappearance of their very good friend, Frank Mitchell. In the course of this difficult evening, one curious interlude stood out. On learning that I was about to go to Vietnam, Reginald took me to one side and asked very seriously and insistently whether he could come with me. He said he was prepared to do anything out there. Now, the motive for this became a little clearer much later on, when I learned that he'd also approached a London literary agent with another extraordinary proposition. Was the government aware, he'd asked her, how economically disruptive dock strikes could be to the country? How would the government react, he wondered, if the firm were to drive down to the London docks and act as unofficial industrial peacemakers? Was it the sort of gesture, he wondered, that would be taken the right way at Tintagel House, where Nipper Read and his squad were inexorably marking off the last days of the firm?
The police work had been continuing in its own quiet and complicated way for well over a year. In the last few weeks before the arrest, the firm went out less and less. The twins stayed in their favorite East End pubs. There was a lot of drinking, plenty of talk, but not that much action. The pensions were still coming in, but discipline was beginning to disintegrate. Too many people knew far too much. By now, key members of the firm were quietly lining up with the police. Old loyalties were dying easily. At dawn on May the 8th, 1968,
a team of detectives arrived at the new Sky Tower block in Clerkenwell, where the Kray family had now moved. They jammed the lift, walked up the stone steps to the 9th floor, and jemmied their way into flat 43.
This was at 6 o'clock in the morning. All the raids had been timed, synchronized to be at the same time. And we knew that the Krays the night before had been to a West End club and they didn't return.
Chief Superintendent Leonard Reed in his operations room at Tintagel House.
And in fact, they were in bed. They were taken out of their beds. They caused us no concern or trouble at all.
How much danger were you in during the inquiry?
Well, it's difficult to gauge, really. There was suggestions from various sources that there was some personal danger. I took what I considered to be reasonable precautions. I used to go home frequently on a different route, and also I go running in the mornings about 5 miles every morning. When I was interviewed by the press, I denied this emphatically because I considered that at that time in the morning, alone in a vest and running shorts, I would be very vulnerable, unless I could run faster than them, of course.
It's been said a police officer develops some sort of relationship with the criminals that he's hunting. What relationship did you have with the twins?
Well, there was no real relationship between the Krays and myself. I'd known them for some time, but I never felt any animosity towards them. This was a facade that was built up, I think, by the Krays. They projected this to the public generally, that this was some sort of hate campaign between themselves and the police, and particularly myself, but this is not the case at all. I know that they disliked me intensely. I know that they, at one stage, bought a snake, which they called Nipper Reed, and there was great jubilation when this snake died. Ronald Kray, I understand, used to feed it live mice.
One assumes you had to use fairly unorthodox methods on occasions.
Well, of course. All detectives use disguises, as you know. In this case, probably more than most. We used a variety of disguises, and they were quite successful. For instance, I, from time to time, posed as a parson, as a dustman, and as a road sweeper, and this kind of thing. One of my officers, I think, even posed as a BBC television interviewer.
What about the use of so-called double agents?
We did employ this from time to time, and very successfully. Of course, a double agent can never be fully trusted, and bearing that in mind, they were used mainly to influence the Krays that we were taking certain action, whereas in fact we were not. In other words, to feed them completely false and bogus information.
How does this case differ to all the others that you've had a hand in?
It was completely independent from New Scotland Yard. We broke away entirely from the normal routine. I had to answer only to the Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Mr. John DeRose, and in that light it was quite different from other inquiries. It was necessary for secrecy to be maintained. This was most important. And towards that end, Detective Superintendent Donald Adams handpicked most of the men that came onto the inquiry subsequently.
Originally, the officer who was deputed to undertake this investigation had to let it be known amongst his colleagues that he had been given a confidential inquiry concerning a domestic matter within the force. In those circumstances, nobody troubled to ask him any further questions. But as the team was augmented, it became obvious that some people might learn something of what was happening. With that in view, the whole of the team was transferred from New Scotland Yard to Tintagel House, where we operated quite successfully. Each and every one of these items was recovered during the course of the Kray inquiry. Some of them are quite obvious in their use. Perhaps the one thing which is unique, certainly unique in my experience, is this, what appears to be a perfectly innocuous case. But down here we have a hypodermic syringe. This bottle here was to have contained cyanide. The idea of the operation was that this needle here would protrude, not as far as it is at the moment, but just a little way out of the box. And by manipulating this ring here, the plunger would be released, which would release the cyanide which is inside the hypodermic syringe out into the needle. Now the way in which it would have been used would have been to have swung the case so that the needle penetrated the victim. The cyanide would enter the victim's body and he would be dead within 8 seconds.
It's important to remember that the police can take no action against anyone unless there is evidence available. This, so far as the Krays were concerned, was always the difficulty. It was essential, of course, that if the police launched an operation against the Krays and their empire, it had to be successful. We could not afford an abortive inquiry. This would have damaged the police public image, and we just could not afford to do that. It's also important to remember that had this happened, had we had an abortive inquiry, the Krays had many influential friends in all sorts of walks of life, and I can visualize that a large complaint would have ensued.
Shortly after Ronald Kray was sent on remand to Brixton, he wrote a cheerful letter to a woman friend asking her to send him a book about General Custer. But if he saw himself making his last stand at the Old Bailey, if the twins were beginning to believe in their own legends, they were soon to be firmly disenchanted. There's nothing romantic about the cool, clinical atmosphere of the Central Criminal Court. In Court Number 1, it was time for society to take its first long, detached look at the firm's activities. Richard Whitmore covered the trials.
It's been a long run. On and off, a year of different court hearings, sometimes deadly dull, sometimes funny, sometimes revolting to listen to. The real climax came in January with the Cornell and McVitie murder trial. It was to last 40 days, the longest, the most expensive murder trial in British history. In the dock, 10 men charged either with murder or as accessories. The judge tried to make them wear numbers to simplify things, but the twins ripped theirs off, shouting that this wasn't a cattle market, and the judge relented. In fact, one would barely have noticed the twins if it hadn't been for their regular outbursts. Big slob, animals, bastard, liar. Caused, I suspect, not just by anger, but by the tension that built up daily and needed an outlet. And from the witness box, some horrifying stories. The twins' former henchman who saw Jack McVitie murdered. Quote, Reggie got the knife and stuck it in McVitie's face. He stuck it in his stomach. Then he got astride and stuck it in his throat and twisted it. Or the unfortunate barmaid at the Blind Beggar who saw Ronald Kray shoot George Cornell dead in front of the customers. After 3 years of private nightmares and a life spent in hiding, the day comes when she has to face Ronald Kray across the courtroom. 100 pairs of eyes on her as she points a trembling hand and says, he did it. She returned on the last day to see the twins sentenced to 30 years each and taken down the steps from the dock into the musty bowels of the Old Bailey. Murderers who've walked down here have killed for many reasons. Passion, greed, jealousy, panic. But the Kray twins, said their prosecutor, killed purely as a matter of business, not for profit, but for prestige.
Outside in the East End, the army they once boasted was second only to the Minister of Wars has gone. The Krays probably had about 100 men they could call on at the height of the firm's activities. Now, like so much of the old East End itself, they've crumbled away, vanished to group and regroup with others who'll undoubtedly try to fill the gap. As for the Krays themselves, their real power over people came from a reputation based entirely on fear and the myths and legends that that fear created. Once it was proved that they were as vulnerable as the people they'd ruled, their hold was gone. The violence was bound to overtake them in the end. Their home at Valence Road now lies condemned. Society demanded something better of it and of them.
After they got their imprisonment, the old East End seemed to go dead and very quiet, not many people on the street. It might be all in my mind, and it might have been in other people's mind, but everyone noticed this.
Power has some strange aphrodisiac effect on people, and these people who really were powerful. This is attractive to people of rather simple mind, whatever their background.
Although they are going to take very unhappily to 30 years inside, they will read all the newspaper reports and they will puff out their chests. Millions.
Organised crime, as such, can no longer flourish in this society. The police have the means, the manpower, and the ability to completely combat it.
Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly, moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.